Thank you. I appreciate that. We got a couple more people coming in. Evelyn, you have your hand raised. You want to chime in? Have a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I'm not Jewish, technically, halachically, and I'm learning. And I'm trying right now, for starters, to keep Torah, keep Shabbat, keep kosher. But like in the Bible, 6 days thou shalt work, the seventh is holy, it's set apart to the Lord, and But then you've got these rabbis that say you can't take a shower, you can't write a letter, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it's like, I do the best I can, but I wonder, did I break Shabbat today when I took the 5-year-old out in the swimming pool? Because she can't go out in the pool alone. She's going to drown. And she's 5. And do I say, no, you have to sit in the house and you can't watch television and you just have to sit there and be quiet because, it's Shabbat? I mean, it's difficult because I know somebody's laughing at me, but I'm just saying, in the Bible, it says keep, Shabbat, but it doesn't give you all these many rules. Like you got to get a set of dishes for meat and another set of dishes for dairy. And I got one refrigerator and I got one sink. That's it, and I got one set of dishes.
You're saying Judaism is a big learning curve. You can't just jump right in head first.
Oh, I see that.
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, you're coming into it. Your kid obviously doesn't understand what's going on. They were raised a certain way to go swimming on Saturday. Like you say, today's no television day. Today's no swimming day. It's difficult. You have any advice for her, Rav?
So the bulk of the prohibitions that exist on Shabbat today are not real prohibitions. For example, telling your kid they can't watch TV on Shabbat, there are many Orthodox families who leave the TV on in secret. I mean, they don't publicize this. I've known Hasidic Jews that will have a little room with the TV on just so they could watch TV on Shabbat. And this is them believing electricity is fire. Also, many Orthodox rabbis who secretly believe electricity is not fire and it's not finishing a circuit or hammering the final blow, which is one of the reasons that they prohibit it. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach wrote a whole book disproving any reason why electricity shouldn't be allowed on Shabbat. So there's ways that you could keep Shabbat that still makes a Sabbath enjoyable. I mean, perhaps in the old days, just reading a book would have been enough. But nowadays, I mean, your kids are used to technology and just to turn it off one day of the week. There's a lot of people who just work all week and never watch TV, but on Shabbat. All right, so that's what's called Oneg Shabbat. I mean, there's a mitzvah to rejoice in the Sabbath, a rabbinic mitzvah. The Torah doesn't mention rejoicing on the Sabbath. What you have to do is bring down every issue you may have that is difficult for you to keep on the Sabbath, and I'll let you know if it's an actual prohibition or if it's just what's called midat hasidut, like something that's nice to do, but not necessarily prohibited. For example, there's any people who say, well, you can't do this because it's not Shabbostic. It's not in the spirit of the Sabbath. That really doesn't exist. That's very subjective. All right. I mean, something could be Shabbostic for you and not Shabbostic for me. They'll think if it's not something that's done normally on Shabbat, it's prohibited. It's not true. Not true. If it doesn't break one of the 39 categories of labor, even the toldos and the avos, the categories under it, it's not a violation. That would even go for swimming in a swimming pool on Shabbat. The chances of you making a raft is slim, so it clearly wouldn't apply to that instance. Setting sail on Shabbat is one thing. Hasidic Jews go to the mikvah on Shabbat. That is going to a pool. Oh, but it's different for them. You really have to make a list on what's uncomfortable for you to keep in modern day Judaism and see if there's ways around it, because there typically is. The understanding is that if there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way, which means that if you think something through enough, you'll find a way to do it to a certain extent. I mean, not to do anything unethical, but Shabbat should be a special day set apart. You could set it apart in different ways. Now, there's things that we have to do on Shabbat, but that aside, you shouldn't make your life impossible.
Yeah, so, a lot of this literature, like if you wanted all of these volumes of all these books, it's a lot of stuff going on, and you have sites like Sefaria, which just have it all, and it's really easy to get to, right? And Chabad. Mm-hmm. So let's say you wanted to do some Torah study, or you wanted to look at the halacha or any of these texts on the Shabbat. Would it be a Torah violation or Shabbat violation to actually use your phone or computer to study?
I don't think it's a Torah violation to even turn on the TV and enjoy an episode of SpongeBob on Shabbat. So I have a whole video on this, and I bring many sources of other rabbis who were Torah observant who felt the same way. It was really one rabbi in the 50s that changed the attitude. Orthodox Jews used to use electricity on Shabbat. Most people don't know this. It wasn't until the Chazon Ish came out against it that everyone followed him. Now, he was a big rabbi in Israel. But before that, there was no prohibition in using electricity on Shabbat. It became a custom now not to use it, and then people who are less knowledgeable think that you're actually lighting a fire when technically a fire can't exist in a vacuum. So like, how can you light a fire inside a bulb? Right? A spark is not a fire. It goes further into this. Also, cooking. There's no prohibition in cooking with electricity on the Sabbath. The prohibition is fire. Don't cook because you may come to light a fire. It appears like just in the Talmud. In the time of Rabbi Akiva, they used to cook in hot springs on the Sabbath. It also says they used to cook with the sun on the Sabbath. And then later on, they prohibited it, lest it looked like you cooked with fire. But it shows that the issue is fire, physical fire.
I don't mean to interrupt. You jumped in here real fast, real Rabbi, but technically speaking, isn't a sun a big giant ball of fire? You are cooking with fire.
No, the sun is plasma.
Plasma?
Yeah. The sun
I guess that's
okay.
Yeah, technical. Okay.
There's no prohibition of cooking. Now, there was a prohibition of baking blocks that they would use in the Mishkan. But to cook alone, bishul, just stam to cook, there's no prohibition of doing that on the Sabbath. It's only, again, if you're cooking with fire.
All right,
actual fire. So a gas stove would be prohibited, but an electric stove or a microwave would not.
But I was going to say on Yom Tov you're actually allowed to transfer fire. So I guess could you argue that like if you were cooking theoretically with the sun, it would just be a transfer of fire because it's just going from one source to another? No.
Well, they make an exception on holidays outside of Shabbat. Shabbat is also a holiday, but on holidays you're allowed to cook with fire. I mean, that's the exception, but not on the actual Sabbath. If the holiday fell on Shabbat, you still couldn't cook with fire. But like on Rosh Hashanah, this is why people smoke cigars or cigarettes on the holiday. But they'll have a candle and they'll light a cigarette. But that for sure, it's allowed to transfer a flame. But on Shabbat, that you can't transfer a flame. You can't even utilize a flame for anything. If it's going, you could use it like a blech, but a blech doesn't cook. It just sort of heats up food, and once you take it off the blech, you're not supposed to put it back. So so you're not really cooking because it's still
right. Now, if you take something off the blech, but if you keep it in your hand without letting go, would that was what I was told as a loophole around that. Was as long as you hold on to it, you can put it actual back on the separation.
So blechs nowadays are electric, so then it doesn't even matter. But I guess some people still use the old just piece of iron. That's what blech means.
Like aluminum foil. Sometimes they wrap foil. All right, let's see. I think we. What do we say, Rabbi? One final question for the evening. We're coming up to 12 o'clock midnight.